and I will try to stop periodically and see if people have questions. So I am going to start with thank you for coming to today's presentation. We're going to be talking about elder abuse. I'm Jenny from Legal Assistance for Seniors. I'm going to just briefly talk about our agency before we get into elder abuse. So I always like to read our mission. It is to ensure the independence and dignity of seniors by protecting their legal rights through education, counseling, and advocacy. What that means is that we have a legal team who provides free legal services in specific areas of law. I come from the community education department. We do presentations all throughout the county. And the one-on-one Medicare counseling is available through the HICAP program. All of our services are free. We are a nonprofit that's been serving older adults in Alameda County since 1976. Oh, I'm just going to let them all come up at the same time. So our attorneys can help in very specific areas. They work with government benefits. This is for people who are already enrolled in Social Security, SSI, or the Cash Assistance Program for immigrants. If they have a problem, an example might be SSI sends a letter and says, we overpaid you and now you owe us money back. Well, the person can come get help from us and we will work with them and with the SSI program to see if it was an error that they got this letter or if it was a valid reason, what their repayment options might look like, or if they could have it waived. So we work within that system. But we only work when someone's already enrolled in a program. We don't get them enrolled into the program. For immigration, we can help renew green cards. And if someone is a legal permanent resident and they want to become a citizen, we help with that process. For elder abuse, and we're going to talk a lot about that today, we do civil cases. So often we help with things like restraining orders. We can also connect people to support services. We may help with some advanced planning. But if it's a criminal case, that will go to the DA's office. And we'll talk about what that looks like more through the presentation. Kin caregiver is also what we call guardianship. That is the lowest age threshold for any of our programs. So each program may vary a little bit. For this one, it's 50 and older. If someone is 50 or older and finds themselves taking care of someone under the age of 18, they don't necessarily want to adopt the child, but they may want those rights that a parent would have by becoming a legal guardian. So we help with the paperwork and court process for that as well. I will say that is the lowest age threshold. The highest threshold for any service is under elder abuse, and that's because the legal statute defines it at age 65. And so our other programs tend to be somewhere in there, but generally around the age of 60 to use our services. And the best way to find out is just to call, because if it's not something we can help with, we will at least try to refer someone to another agency that can help them. For planning for the future, I like to tell people we are not a full scope estate planning office. We do not do things like wills and trusts. We have a presentation on advanced healthcare directives. We also may help clients who come in for elder abuse or guardianship cases with their advanced directive and power of attorney, but those are always tied to other services. So you couldn't just drop in and say like, hey, can you help me fill out this advanced healthcare directive? But we do talk about how to fill those out during the presentation. And then our health, it says Medi-Cal there. I just like to make sure people know you do not have to have Medi-Cal to use our services. So if someone has Medicare and Medi-Cal as their health insurance, we can help with all of it. But if someone has Medicare and a supplement or a Medicare Advantage plan or retiree coverage or TRICARE, like we can help with any of it as long as Medicare is involved, we can help. So often a case there might start with a visit to the HICAP counselor who's going to help figure out what the issue is, and then they can elevate it to the health law department if they think they need to take the case. And then our housing department is small. It's very case by case. I think there's actually one more line on that. Yeah. So right now we only have funding to help with tenant issues. If someone's a landlord and they're having a problem, unfortunately, we just don't have the capacity to help, but we would at least try to make a referral if someone called us with a question. Okay, that was all the legal stuff. I'll briefly also mention the HICAP program, which is Medicare counseling. It's objective information. We do not sell insurance products. Our job is to know all about Medicare so we can answer your questions, make sure you know your options. I saw a question come into the chat, so I'm just going to see. Oh, my voice cut out? Okay, sorry. So the age threshold for elder abuse is 65. For guardianship, it's only 50. And then most of our programs are going to be somewhere in between that at around the age of 60. So it just kind of depends on the program. The best thing to do is call. And if we can't help, we will try to make a referral. Hopefully that was clear. I could take if people are having trouble hearing, let me know because I could take the headphones out. But it's
It
a
was
busy.
fine. It just cut out for like a
Oh,
second
okay.
and I couldn't answer her question because I didn't hear it either.
Okay. I was like, it's a busy day in the office, so I was trying to keep them on to cut down noise. Um, so just a little bit about that high cap program. We do get funding. It comes federally from CMS down to California Department of Aging, and then to the county, we get funded through the Area Agency on Aging to run the program. Our counselors are mostly volunteers who go through extensive training on Medicare and then do continuing education to stay up to date. They're incredible and fantastic, and many of them have been with us for many years as volunteers, so we're really lucky to have them. Uh, Prior to COVID, we were in person at more than 30 locations. I would say we're at about half of them back in person now. We are working on getting people back in person at all of our sites, but um, everywhere in the county, there is somewhere near you that you could be seen in person if you'd like, or you can have a phone appointment. You just have to call and let the scheduler know what you'd like. We do lots of presentations like this also, so people know their rights and their options, although today we're going to be focusing on a topic that does not do with Medicare. If it's a complicated case, the counselor can refer it to the health law department, and because I like to say it a lot, all of our services are free. Okay, now we can think about the topic we're here for today, which is elder abuse. And it's really important to talk about it and to talk about ways to identify it, ways to try and remedy it and report it. And that's because it's widespread. It can happen to people from all kinds of backgrounds. And so the problem is that it's still hidden. It's from research, they think it's only 1 in 5 cases that actually get reported. And so we hope that by coming out and talking about thinking about it and what to look for, more people will at least report if they suspect some sort of elder abuse. So often abusers are someone known to the victim. It's an adult child or grandchild, some other relative, or possibly the caregiver. Um, these are some things that we hear about reasons that people say that they may be involved in elder abuse. They're not, they don't excuse it, right? But just to kind of have an idea of what is it that people say when they're in these cycles. They may be stressed out with their own responsibilities of caring for their victim, but often are also financially dependent on their victim. So there's a bit of a stress and cycle thing happening there. They also could have their own drug or alcohol problem or be mentally ill. They may blame the victim for their own inability to have a successful and fulfilling life. They may have health issues, and there sometimes is a history of abuse where, when the person who is now the caregiver was younger, they felt like they were the one who was abused by the person that they're now taking care of. And so it perpetrates this cycle where now that they feel like they have the power, they're going to use that in ways to help them feel better about their own experiences when they were younger. So again, none of these are reasons that we say like, oh, okay, well, obviously it's fine. But it's just to get an idea of things that people will say when they're in these situations. And it's like, well, why is this happening? When we talk about elder abuse, we break it into 4 categories: financial, physical, emotional, and psychological are kind of lumped together, and then neglect. We're going to look at each of them separately. I like definitions, so each one of them is going to have its own sort of sometimes wordy definition, like this one. So this one's from the Older Americans Act. It says financial exploitation is the fraudulent or otherwise illegal, unauthorized, or improper actions by a caregiver, fiduciary, or other individual in which resources of an older person are used by another for personal profit or gain. So I'm going to break that down a little. Someone who is supposed to be helping the older adult manage their finances is doing something to redirect those finances to their own needs or wants, and it's to the detriment possibly of the person who they are meant to support, right? That older adult. Or it could also be actions that result in depriving an older person of the benefits, resources, belongings, or assets to which they are entitled. So, right, sometimes the person who's abusing them financially is causing them to then also not have access to their own resources and supports that they need to be able to live their life. And the problem with this is that I just told you only 1 in 5 cases get reported. That's about elder abuse in general. When it comes to financial, it's suspected that it's really only 1 in 44 that gets reported. Now, there are a lot of reasons why someone might not want to report. We just said that often these things happen by someone who's known to the victim. If it's a family member, they may not want to put them into the legal or justice system. But of course, we know that it's wrong for someone to be taking these resources. And so what we want is things to get reported so that we can have them stop, right? And put the older adult back into a safe situation, a stable financial situation. I'm gonna get into some stuff on financial, but I just want to see if there's any questions so far. Okay. Was that a wave? Oh, there's a kitty. Oh, okay. All right, I will continue on. So some examples of financial abuse. We do sometimes see it in the forms of scams and fraud. Although when we do our scam presentation, we do a presentation on consumer fraud. I usually talk more about how, like, in those cases, often the perpetrator of the crime is more likely to be someone unknown to the victim. It could be, right, in some of these cases that it is someone that they know who's gotten them involved in some sort of scam or fraud, and they're using the older adult's money. Um, oh, I see a request for my email address, so I'm gonna just go ahead and put that in while I'm talking. So clearly I can't type and think at the same time. Okay, here we go. A lot of these other ones that we're looking at, we're going to talk about in the context of this is going to be someone who's really known to them and very involved. So misuse of power of attorney, and that would be that they're using that power to take then finances for their own personal gain. Coercion or deception to get them to transfer assets. We'll talk more about some examples of that too. Misuse of accounts or credit cards, and also things like stealing cash or valuables out of the home. And so these are all things that would be considered financial abuse. Some signs that you would want to watch out for. If there's an apparent change in the signature style of the older adult, that could be a sign that someone else is now signing things for them. So that's a red flag. If you're noticing unusual or inappropriate bank activity. So if my grandpa has gone into the bank every Friday for the last, 20 years, let's say, and taken out $100 on Friday, that's what he does. If all of a sudden he starts going in and taking out $500 every Friday, the banker should question that. And they are being trained to look for those signs. But if you are involved or you're noticing that kind of thing, you can also report that. The bankers now can fill out a form and it gets reported. And so hopefully like more of this is getting stopped. But often changes like that are because someone is pushing that person to go do that and then, using funds for themselves. It's not likely that my grandpa has suddenly just decided to start spending far more money on himself every weekend. So that's an important thing to look out for. Power of attorney being given after the person is no longer clear of mind, or if there's a sudden change to their attorney, in fact, those could be signs that there's some sort of manipulation and abuse happening around their finances. If this one's always so sensitive to me too. If there's new acquaintances expressing affection for an elder with assets. So I like to talk about at any age, right? It's fine to have new connections, make friends, maybe have someone that's paying attention to you. Those are all things that can feel very good. And what we sort of want to draw the boundary with is if that person is talking about things like moving in with you or helping out with your finances by getting on your bank account, right? These are big red flags as to someone who may have not the right intentions about why they're connecting with this person. So, great to have friends, great to have relationships. It's got to stop at the line where it's about banking or housing. And then if a person is starting to miss their belongings from their home and they're noticing things that are, not in the house that aren't where they should be, things like jewelry or art or silverware, those are all valuable. It could be any other thing too. The idea about that being someone could be taking these things from the house, they could be pawning them, they could be selling them online. those are assets that belong to the older adult. If they ever needed to sell those things to pay for their own care, right? Those things belong to them. So they should not be disappearing from the house and benefiting someone else financially. We also look at if there's deliberate isolation of the older adult by a caregiver. Isolation is a big risk factor for elder abuse. And often that's because if you can isolate someone, one, they're not telling people what's going on. And two, that caregiver is in a position where they can say, oh, well, I'm the only one that shows up. I'm the only one that helps or that cares about you. So you have to do what I say, or you need to, sign things over to me or allow me to do this or that. And so that is a big risk factor. If mail is starting to go missing or is being intercepted before the person can review like their own credit card statements, bank statements, that could be a sign that someone is using those resources and they don't want the person to see that on the statement. If someone has already always been someone that, responsibly pays their bills and rent and mortgage on time and, it's part of their budget, and all of a sudden these things are starting to go unpaid, that could be a sign that someone is taking their finances, their money, and using it for something else. Um, Back to the sort of new people, if you're seeing a will drawn up naming recent acquaintances, that's very suspicious. And transferring all of the assets in a promise for lifelong care. So this one's really scary because people will say things like, oh, I'm here and I care about you and I take care of you. And, if you want me to have the house, it's just going to be a lot easier if we transfer it now. That way it doesn't have to go through probate. Well, once the title is transferred to a new person and they have the deed, they own all control of whatever happens with that property. So they can make all of these promises, have that title transferred over, and then say, you don't live here anymore. You need to go. And that person has very little they can do to show that, they didn't just make a bad decision, that they were coerced. Now, there are cases where you can get, reported to the DA and get help, but we just want to be careful about transferring anything that's in a promise for care. So I'm going to say this before there's going to be a tip section at the end of each of these definitions. Um, they've always been written this way in our presentation. I feel like it's a little blamey, like, oh, if you don't do these things, like it's your fault if you have some sort of abuse. So I don't like to think of it as tips for avoiding financial abuse. I like to think of these as like good tips for all of us to just think about and be aware of as we are going through life. And that is ask questions. If something is not clear to you, if you are not understanding why something needs to happen a certain way, stop and ask those questions. This one always kind of makes me laugh too. Choose people you trust when giving someone your power over your financial decisions. I mean, of course, none of us are going to go out and be like, I don't really trust you, but I guess I'll let you do this. So the way I like to think about this one is you've probably chosen someone you trust. If they are proving themselves to not be that trustworthy person that you thought that they were going to be, um, think about who else could help with this and go ahead and make changes. You are not stuck with that one person. So, try, of course, to think ahead, but if something's not working, it's not working, and you can always make a change. Get legal advice about planning for incapacity. So as I mentioned, we are not a full scope estate planning office, but there are many estate planning attorneys. We usually just refer to the Alameda County Bar Association. They have a lawyer referral program. You can call them and they'll give you the names of attorneys in your area. And then you call those people and ask questions about their costs and their services. Usually they're going to have you fill out things like your power of attorney. Most of them will also include the advance directive. They may talk about having a will or a trust. That will depend on you, your assets, what you can afford, all of that. If estate planning is out of reach, then I would suggest that there are at least some other sites and resources, like websites with free wills or things you can fill out. There's Compassion and Choice is also one that I know. It's a nonprofit organization, Compassion and Choice. They offer some of these documents for free. They look a lot at like other end of life planning as well. So if the idea of going to an estate planning attorney is like, oh my gosh, I can't do that, start looking into some of the other resources just to have things in place. If you have any questions about legal documents you're being asked to sign or financial documents, get advice, ask those questions, take your time as much as you need to, because tied into this next one, you really want to give yourself time to think before you make decisions. If someone is pressuring you into immediate action, it's going to be because it's a benefit to them, not to you, right? So take your time, make sure you understand what you're signing, you're not left with questions. And then, if it feels appropriate, then go ahead and proceed. We're going to go ahead and move to physical. Any questions before I transition from financial to physical? Okay, you're all very quiet. I'm going to keep going. So this one's a CDC definition: the intentional use of physical force that results in acute or chronic illness, bodily injury, physical pain, functional impairment, distress, or death. So I think a lot of us can imagine that we know what physical abuse is going to look like. Things like hitting, beating, pushing, shoving, kicking, and pinching, right? It can also be seriously trying to cause physical harm. So, maybe the caregiver themselves is not physically capable of like doing all the harm that they're trying to do, but if they're trying at all, that's going to fall under physical abuse. Using or attempting to use a weapon will fall under this category. Unreasonably restraining someone. And I think a lot of us, when we think about restraining, think about someone, maybe tied to the bed, they can't get up. But it could also be things like not giving them access to a walker or some sort of device that they need to get up and move around. That can also be unreasonably restraining them by keeping them stuck where they are. And then also prolonged withholding of food and nourishment will fall both under physical, but we'll also see it again when we talk about neglect. Some signs are injuries that are not being properly cared for. If you're seeing cuts, bruises, burns, discoloration, and it's not being bandaged or treated, like there's a sign that there's possibly some physical abuse going on. Dehydration and malnutrition without an illness-related cause. This one I always really like to spend some time on because dehydration is really scary in the side effects that it has. Because if you are not properly hydrated, and that does not mean no water at all for days and days, but it could mean not enough, right? And not enough hydration. Um, you can start to have symptoms that will look like dementia. You may have hallucinations. If I were a caregiver who was trying to trigger power of attorney so that I could sign the house over to myself, uh, that might be a great tool to make it look like the person I'm caring for is not clear of mind anymore, and those things need to be triggered. So, if you're starting to see symptoms that look like they could be dementia, like you may want to look into if this person is having their other nutrition and hydration needs met, um, because right? In the context of talking about elder abuse, that could be a very effective tool. You may notice that the person is giving signs of depression, fear, anger, hysteria, that they are experiencing withdrawal, they have unexplained weight loss. These can all be signs of abuse. And also if the person is spending time in soiled clothing or bedding, right, that they're not being cared for in a timely manner and properly, those could be signs that there's some sort of physical abuse happening. So again, tips for everyone: be cautious about who you let move in with you. Keep in contact with friends, neighbors, healthcare providers, and also invite people to visit you if that's possible, especially if there's someone living in the home, because it's good for them to know that other people pop by, know your routines, check on you, right? Um, I'll talk more about, I'm going to talk more about keeping connections on another one. It just kind of popped into my head, but we'll save that. So if you are noticing any of these things, the most important thing you can do is report it. This is usually where I get the question, what do you mean report it? Where does that happen? A good first step is adult protective services. I feel like a lot of people are familiar with the program of child protective services, right? If you suspect that a minor is being abused in some sort of way, you can call CPS and it's anonymous and you give them all the information you can about the situation. It's not your job to investigate it. You just kind of report what you know, and then it's their job to go in and investigate. Well, the good news is adult protective services also exists. They serve people who are 65 and older because, again, that's that definition for elder abuse. They also will serve people who are between the ages of 18 and 64 if that person is considered a dependent adult. So that doesn't mean like, oh, it's just a grown person who like lives in their parents' house, right? But actually someone who has some sort of need that makes them considered dependent and unable to do some sort of task or care for themselves. And so if they fall into that middle age range, APS can also serve them. But generally, we're talking about for someone who's 65 or older. And I will give you the number to APS on a future slide. And I know someone said they had to leave at 11. You're going to get a copy of all of these slides, so you will be able to look at it. And if anyone has questions, you can always reach out to me afterwards. So emotional abuse, and here, of course, in the definition, we're going to say psychological abuse, is the willful infliction of mental or emotional anguish by threat, humiliation, or other verbal or nonverbal conduct. We would see this in the ways of yelling, someone using abusive phrases, insulting their person they're caring for, threatening to put away an elder who's still clear of mind, right? If you don't do what I say, we're going to put you in a home. If you don't sign these documents, we're going to put you in the nursing home. And if that person is being intentionally isolated from friends or family, that can be emotional abuse. If you find that the person has hesitation to talk openly, either in front of or about their caregiver, that could be a sign that there's something going on there. If they're telling implausible stories, you are listening to this person and you're like, there is no way that you went to that place or that you did that thing that you're describing to me. But they're like, oh no, this happened. It could be a sign that there's some sort of psychological stuff going on underneath, right? And it could be from abuse. And so that could be a sign. If you are seeing confusion, disorientation, denial, agitation, or depression, these are also possible signs of abuse. When the person is telling you about something, if you're seeing exaggerated fear or anger in response to the thing, that could also be a sign. So you might go, yeah, okay, that's a thing that I would be mad about, but I would be mad about it at maybe this level. And your response seems to be like way up here, right? There could be something psychologically underlying all of that. Withdrawal and helplessness are also signs, as is the older adult not being permitted to meet alone with other people. And we'll pop on here for the last one, which is neglect. The National Center on Elder Abuse defines it as intentional or neglectful acts by a caregiver or trusted individual that lead to or may lead to harm of a vulnerable adult. So what does this look like? Failure to provide food or medication, right? That can be neglect. Failure to take elder to necessary medical appointments. Failure to provide physical aids such as glasses, hearing aids, or other hygiene. And if the caretaker is letting the living environment become unsafe. So these are all types of neglect that someone could be experiencing with their caregiver. It is also possible that someone could be in a position where they normally would be able to take care of themselves, but something has triggered them to stop taking care of themselves. And you could also report self-neglect if you suspect that that is happening. So you could call Adult Protective Services and say, hey, I'm really concerned. This person doesn't seem to be, eating or going to their appointments or taking care of their physical needs. The hygiene seems to have really declined. And APS will send out a social worker to go investigate. So that is the nice thing about reporting to Adult Protective Services. It's not the legal system. You're not sending the police out to check on them. That's a wellness check. You can also ask for those if you think someone needs a wellness check. But when you're sending out Adult Protective Services, you're saying, I suspect that something is not right in a particular situation, and I would like someone to go and try and have a conversation with them. Maybe that's going to be more comfortable than you kind of butting in and trying to have that conversation. So Adult Protective Services is anonymous. You call them, give them as much detail as you can. They will go out, knock on the door, right, try to have a conversation with that person, and really just check on them as well. And if the person is open to it, they can start getting them connected with services. The older adult could also say, I don't want to talk to you. And unfortunately, APS can't force them unless they see something like life-threatening maybe happening in the background. So some signs to look for about neglect. If the health condition caused by failure to provide care, right, is declining because they're not getting the care that they need. If they're living in filthy or dangerous conditions, that could be that maybe some food is being brought to them, but it's not being picked up or cleaned up in a timely manner. It could sit there, for an indeterminate amount of time, becoming unsafe and unsanitary. Also, if the person is mobile and moving around, but there's trip hazards around the floor, there's carpets or wires or boxes piled up, these are not safe conditions for the person. And then also, if we're seeing isolation, malnutrition, and dehydration, these are signs that something is wrong. So some tips include participating in community activities for as long as you're able. You are all here on this Zoom. That's a community activity. You're doing a great job. Keeping regular medical, dental, hairdressing, or any other personal appointments that that person would normally go to. That's good for a variety of reasons. Obviously, our medical appointments are very important, but some of these other contacts, right? This is really important. And we learned, I think, a lot more about this during the pandemic when everyone was isolated and not having regular daily contact with people if they were living alone and you didn't want to open your door and talk to people because you didn't know if they were sick. And so people were not having contact. And that is also partly, right, that's isolation, but it's really important for our mental health to have contact with other people. Our animal nature is not to be alone. And so it's really interesting from the psychology standpoint that it's not that you have to have deep, meaningful connections and conversations every day of your life, but even just minimal interactions, like with the postal carrier or, going to get your haircut or whatever, and you chit chat with someone. Those are really important for our stability and our mental health to have those little connections. So trying to keep everything as much as you can. A buddy system with someone can be a great idea, whether that's that you pop by each other's house on a weekly basis for coffee, or if you can't get out or they can't get out, maybe it's phone calls, right? But knowing that someone checks on them, knows their routines, and that if something happened, there'd be someone who'd notice it, right, before it gets very far. And then also exploring alternative sources of care and support can be really important. It is hard to be a caregiver. It's a lot of work. It's mentally and physically a lot to care for another person. So, of course, the more that can be spread out across people, right, the less exhausting it's going to be to just one caregiver. But um, sometimes it might mean bringing in outside support. It could be paid caregiving through an agency or private hire. It could be through qualifying for in-home support services with Medi-Cal. Medi-Cal is no longer looking at your assets, only your monthly income. So many more people are now qualifying for in-home support services. Having someone come in and doing some of that work can be a big relief and help reduce the risk of abuse. Um, if someone has a long-term care insurance policy, maybe that's how they come bring some help in. Sometimes it's, local groups or church affiliation or something like that where there's some sort of support. And then there are some nonprofits where you can get respite care, usually at very low cost, which is really important because the caregiver themselves may need a break, whether it's to go on their own vacation or maybe just to take a little time off of the responsibilities of caregiving for someone. So setting something like that up can be a big help, even though it's only a short period of time, right? Because it gives that person a little room to breathe. Okay, and this last one I think is probably one of the hardest. It seems so easy to say ask for help when you need it. But I think a lot of us will have this like self-talk, right? Where it's like, well, I don't want to ask for help with this because I don't want to be a burden and people are very busy and I don't know if I'd be able to, to ask that much of somebody. Um, so here's how I like to reframe this. If someone that I cared about asked me for help with something, my natural response is going to be, if it's something I can help them with, I'm going to say yes, right? My inclination would be, yes, I care about this person. What can I help them with? So I try to take that and hold that when thinking about if I need to ask for help for something for myself, because I know that I would show up for someone who's asking me. And so I want to have to believe that someone would also show up for me. And if they can't in the way that I'm asking, maybe they can help me figure out another way of getting what I need or splitting things up so that I can get the support that I need. So asking for help is really important, even when it feels hard. So taking all of that, all of these different types of abuse that we've looked at today, what happens when we report? What are our options? Well, there's different kinds of remedies. The purpose of all of these is to try and protect the older adult, to try and remove the abuser, or the caregiver from the situation, to possibly recover damages from an abuser. Now, I was listening to someone else present on elder abuse a while ago, and I thought it was really great the way that they said this, which was when it comes to financial abuse, people who are committing that kind of crime are generally not like socking it away in their 401k for later. So when you try to recover damages, it can be really hard to actually get money back because those people have probably taken that and spent it on their own needs. But there are ways to at least try to recover things for someone, and it is worth pursuing those if that's an option. And then the last purpose of this would be to criminally prosecute and punish an abuser. And that is a very high level that, again, a lot of people may not be reporting elder abuse because they don't want to put their family member into that system. But there are many steps before that level if the person wants to look at what their options are to try and end the abuse. So if it's financial abuse, it could be revoking power of attorney from the person who's financially abusing it. There's the Elder Abuse and Dependent Adult Civil Protection Act that allows people to get restraining orders or try and get civil damages returned to them. If someone has someone who is supposed to be managing their finances, there can be a petition to compel accounting, which means that that person then has to show receipts for things, report where all money went. And it's very long and complicated, but it's a way to oversee things. If a person has to go to, well, let me step back on that one. Conservatorship, right? It is something that the court assigns to a person who they believe can no longer make decisions for themselves. We are all allowed to make bad decisions if we understand the consequence and we choose to make the bad decision anyway. Conservatorship would be someone is making decisions without really understanding how that's going to impact them or have consequences, and they are no longer able to see those things. So they may need the support of someone else who's going to help make decisions for them. So that person who wants to be the decision maker would then go to court, say that this conservatorship is needed. The court will then decide, and they may appoint that person to be the conservator. They may appoint someone outside of the family if the family doesn't want the responsibility, but they're trying to, get someone to oversee things. Sorry, I'm spending a lot of time on this one, but I just want to make sure I didn't gloss over conservatorship. So if the person is in a conservatorship and it appears that there's some sort of abuse happening, right? You can actually petition the court to review everything and make sure that they have not assigned the conservatee someone who is now abusing them. And then the elder abuse criminal statute is also what protects us and allows people to prosecute criminals. So how does that come out? Well, the civil restraining orders, and that is something that we can help with because I said we take civil cases. These are an order that comes after a hearing, and it's a restraining order so that the person who's been abusing has to either stay away, stay off the property. It doesn't have to always mean no contact ever moving forward. And I think that's what a lot of people fear when they think about getting a restraining order against their abuser. But it can be something that defines how that person is or is not allowed to be in the older adult's life. So that can be granted for up to 5 years. It's ordered automatically, but once it's approved, it's going to be put into the law enforcement system. And so if a person is violating the restraining order, the authorities get called, they're going to know that there's a restraining order. They're going to be able to show up with that information. Criminal protective orders are a little bit different. These are an emergency order in the first year that is meant to last about 5 to 7 days. So that's very different than a restraining order that's meant to last longer. And these can be requested by police or law enforcement on behalf of the older adult. There's also a criminal protective order that can be requested by the district attorney, and that is on behalf of either the victim themselves or someone who witnessed a crime. And then when it comes to criminal prosecution, again, that's something we would refer over to the DA's office. They would look at evidence and decide whether or not it's appropriate to take a case. And then they would work with the person to pursue that through the legal system. They would also be able to get support from victim witness services. So that's a department of that will also help support the person who's been being abused to help try and stabilize and get connected to services. So this is the important slide of phone numbers that you will get. It has the phone number for Adult Protective Services. It is available 24 hours a day. Reporting is confidential, right? They are not going to ask for your name. They're not going to tell anyone you called. And then a trained social worker will be the one who investigates any reports of abuse. If the person lives in a long-term care facility and there are accusations of abuse, the ombudsman is the person who will oversee uh, investigating what's happening and possibly working with the nursing home to come up with, a plan to stop things or figure out what's going on. The ombudsman does not work for the nursing home. They are an outside party who comes into the nursing home and hears both sides of what's going on. So they would investigate abuse or neglect, and then they would be helpful in the decision-making process. The district attorney's office, again, for criminal elder abuse, their phone number is there. They have an department that investigates elder abuse. And then we are legal assistants for seniors. And again, we do civil cases if the person is either over the age of 65 or a dependent adult, 18 to 64, and there's some sort of abuse, you may call us and we will talk about the situation and see what options you have. So, calling is just for information. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden you've started this whole legal process and you can't have a say in how it works. So I think that's helpful and really important for people to understand. Um, if it's not something we can help with, we would at least try to give a referral again to somewhere else that does do the work. If you want to reach us, that is our main office phone number. That'll get you to the front desk staff, and they can help direct you to the appropriate legal department if you're calling for legal services. Our office is on Hagenberger. We're just down by the airport. But not all of our attorneys are in every day. We do a remote hybrid at our office. And so we recommend that people call for an appointment. It's better than just showing up, because the worst is when someone shows up saying, hey, I need help with this thing. And we say, there's no one in the office right now who can help with that. So it's really best to call and make an appointment. Our website is on there. You'll get these slides. I'm just going to go to the last one, which is when I was talking about Medicare counseling, if that sounded like something you may be interested in, you can call the scheduling line, which is 510-839-0393, and that will take you to the person who schedules appointments. You can let them know if you want to be seen in person or just do a phone appointment, and they will help you figure that out according to your schedule. The 800 number is good statewide, so anyone anywhere in California can call that and get routed to their local HICAP. Okay, those are all my slides. I didn't see anything come into the chat. Do we have questions?
Actually, there was one sent to me directly. Can you touch on elder abuse, financial restraining orders specifically?
They exist, and I'm not an attorney, so I can't because I don't know enough about them. But if you call and ask questions of our attorneys, they would be able to answer that. And they like it when I don't try to answer legal questions. So I don't want to say anything that I'm not sure of.
I'm gonna stop the recording so that the questions won't be on the recording
Sure.
going forward. That way, if anybody has any more personal questions, they are not, that's all not part of it.